Was that your first slide, Derek, or were you going?
Yeah, this is it. That's the first one.
Okay, that was the first one. Okay, I know you
Oh,
flipped a couple of them.
yeah.
All right, welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for continuing on the day. We're going to be talking about we've been working all day towards this moment. Um, they say this is going to be the Super Bowl of Lafayette visits. Derek, is that a fair
Very
assessment?
fair.
Yeah, fair
Uh,
assessment. So,
we'll
uh,
get to that actually.
what's that?
We'll get to that actually.
Good. So we've got Dr. Derek Wood, who's a visiting assistant professor at Tulane University, has presented for us multiple times for the symposium and for lectures before, and just a wonderful resource on New Orleans and Louisiana history. And he's going to be talking about Lafayette's triumphant visit to New Orleans. Derek, thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Oh, my pleasure, Jason. Thank you. And again, thanks for having me all these couple of times. I feel honored to be invited back. Um, yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about Lafayette coming to New Orleans. Um, I'm going to be reading some of these old printouts from newspapers. So apologies when I flub things because it's, sometimes the print's all smeared and it's just hard to read it. So bear with me on that. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about the context in which Lafayette would have come to the United States and then Louisiana and New Orleans. Briefly, just because I think that's important and trying not to like rehash what has already been said, but it's fair to say, like we've all learned today and talked about, it's not that Lafayette's tour of 24 and 25 was one of the most memorable events in this young republic's life, right? By the mid 20s, the country was facing all these political tensions, this terrible, contentious 1824 presidential election, sectional divisions between states, regions, growing pains would not be an inaccurate description of what was going on here. But amidst this turmoil, Lafayette was invited to tour the nation as this living symbol of the Revolutionary War, its ideals, unity, liberty. So his visit is not just only this like nostalgic reflection on the past, which it was. It's also a deliberate attempt to bridge divides and to remind Americans of their shared national heritage, whether that be real or imagined. I don't know. So Lafayette was one of the last surviving heroes of the Revolutionary War. So he was the ideal candidate to do this. His commitment to liberty gave him unparalleled credibility as this unifying figure. And in New Orleans is a pretty great, fascinating backdrop in which to think about his visit to America. And it didn't necessarily his visit here didn't necessarily quell tensions within the city between the old French population and the city's new American inhabitants. It did act as a temporary salve, temporary. Um, the city united for a common cause, and that was to entertain the general. His visit with all this pomp and circumstance, so I think it could be the origins of New Orleans' reputation as a great host city and a place of unparalleled hospitality. Um, and I don't, again, I don't want to touch on too much of this other materials, but and I'm not a Europeanist, but I was thinking about what was going on in France that would have like inspired him to so happily take this offer to tour the United States, often in pretty rough condition, terrible roads, slow moving vessels. Um, the political landscape in France in 1824 was dominated by this Bourbon Restoration that was going on, reinstation of the monarchy after Napoleon's fall, Louis the 18th, and then later Charles the 10th were king, and their governments were pursuing policies to kind of undo some of these French Revolution and Napoleonic era reforms economically, heavy debt due to the Napoleonic Wars, poor harvests also apparently, and rising unemployment. Social tensions festered for sure. Um, This restored monarchy was trying to balance, the demands of the old aristocracy and the revolutionary ideals cherished by many of the population, including Lafayette, right? There's a lot of discontent amongst the working people who were feeling alienated, right? Nothing new. And personally, we all know Lafayette was also in a difficult financial situation, as was discussed earlier. His generosity towards the American Revolution and his commitment to other revolutionary causes strained his finances greatly. He had used his funds to support the Continental Army, and his estates in France were insufficient to sustain his lifestyle, his various philanthropic efforts. Because beyond the American Revolution, Lafayette championed numerous revolutionary movements. Obviously, the French Revolution. He played that pivotal role in writing the first draft of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, leader of the National Guard. All these things, he was trying to balance revolutionary ideals with his constitutional monarchy, but he also supported the Polish independent movement from Russia, Haitian Revolution, kind of indirectly. We all know starchly opposed slavery, Spanish reforms, trying to limit royal absolutism, advocate for Greek liberation from the Ottoman rule, and in Italy, these Carboni movements, I think that's how you say that's what they're called. Revolutionary groups that were striving for unification. So he was the real deal. He put his money where his mouth was. He's committed to revolutionary ideals, which often exacerbated his precarious financial situation. But it also solidified his global reputation as this champion of liberty, of justice. Lafayette was the genuine article. I think that's very fair to say. But his financial situation, though, it also mirrored broader economic challenges of the time. His family's wealth had been greatly depleted, of course, during the Revolution. And I think it's fair to say he was generous to a fault almost. And to alleviate these troubles, the US government, Congress extended this aid to Lafayette in recognition of his service, including granting him an estate in Louisiana as a broader effort to honor his service, and definitely helped him out, and underscored his enduring ties to the U.S., setting the stage for this tour. And coincidentally, as he was preparing to come, this Italian-born New Orleans banker, Vincent Nolte, was in Europe at the time, 24, doing business, and he helped Lafayette get his finances in order before coming over here. Lafayette later did visit with Nolte in New Orleans, maybe at his house, designed by Benjamin Latrobe here at 537 Royal and Toulouse Street. Lafayette later hooked Nolte up with French officials, and he acted as an arms supplier to the French army, primarily dealing in used weapons. But according to this great article by Patricia Brady, Lafayette conferred important symbolic unity on the states he visited, perhaps especially on the still suspiciously foreign and Anglo-Americanized state of Louisiana. His tour was hoped to bring, as I said, this nostalgic return to the time of national pride and unity, and perhaps nowhere in the nation was this unity needed more than in Louisiana, and especially in New Orleans. And moreover, his visit could give a sense of legitimacy to this new state with a different background. The era of Monroe's, what was called the era of good feelings, was ending. Lafayette was needed. Elections today have nothing on 1824. It was this crazy, there was no election day. It was just throughout the autumn, people were casting ballots for Jackson, for Adams, for Crawford, for Henry Clay coming in the rear. There was no actual majority, and so the House of Representatives had to choose among the three candidates. And Adams, obviously, a lot of people were very mad, and in an effort to create national unity, Lafayette was invited to visit this now 50-year-old nation, all expenses paid, and that's the most important part. And finally, stories of the founder, Washington crossing the Delaware, the signing of the in Declaration of Independence often emphasize heroism, moral clarity. Of course, people today, some people still look up to the fathers, but Washington was dead. Jefferson was at the end. Lafayette was the obvious candidate to present this nostalgic image of the United States. Nostalgia can be a powerful, multifaceted tool to unite people under a single cause. I teach a course on nostalgia in American history here at Tulane. It can be detrimental, it could be a positive thing. But New Orleans in 1824 was a kind of a rougher city, newly American city, and as I just mentioned, viewed suspiciously by some people. Just 20 years before his visit, Governor William Claiborne described the residents as uninformed, indolent, luxurious, in a word, illy fitted to be useful citizens of a republic. Some people held that sentiment 20 years later. And despite the difficulties, New Orleans was growing very fast. Refugees from Haiti, the Americas, and the foreign French, streams of French-born people, often driven by political turmoil and ideals of freedom, found a haven in antebellum New Orleans in the 19th century, right? This is a process which made the city more culturally enriched than before. And they contributed, all these people contributed to the swelling numbers. And around the time, say, of the Battle of New Orleans, the population was more than 17,000 people. I see all kind of numbers as high, possibly as 24,000. It continued to grow. In 1820, it was more than 27,000 people. By 1830, it was 46,000 people. So a lot of things were making the city grow very fast. Obviously, the steamboat arriving in Mississippi. The development of the cotton growing industry was equally as phenomenal and contributed to New Orleans' emergence as a cotton exporting port. By the end, get to that war of, this is something like the New Orleans, I meant to flesh that earlier, that Lafayette would have seen this being an 1830 image of the city. The city that was producing about 35,000 bales per year in 1812. By 1820, it was 54,000, and it was just doubling by every few years. The Cotton Triangle between New Orleans, New York, and Liverpool was very well established. These enormous fortunes gained in the city and its emergence as a major port affected the economic and social development of New Orleans as a whole. And sugar and cotton, of course, also had tragic ramifications, further invigorating the slave trade, exacerbating the brutal conditions already faced by enslaved laborers. Lafayette's, of course, opposition to slavery was well documented, yet this was the New Orleans Lafayette visited. And coincidentally, upon his visit, a French aristocrat named Joseph Raffignac, I'm sorry, I meant to put that one up a few minutes ago. Joseph Raffignac was mayor of the city. And Raffignac, after military service in France, came to America as a young man. He was not quite the level of aristocrat as Lafayette was, but his godparents were the Duke and Duchess of Orleans. That's not bad. He continued his military service here. He worked as a banker, served on the city council, various other roles. Also, like Lafayette, who discarded his title of Marquis, the New Orleans mayor discarded his title because he was Count Louis Philippe Joseph de Raffignac. But when he was mayor, he was just simply Joseph Raffignac. As mayor, he oversaw numerous beautification and improvement campaigns. By some, he was assailed as a corrupt aristocrat and the champion of the backward French community. But like many of the foreign French who settled in Louisiana after the Revolution, Raffignac shared the sentiment of many of his fellow countrymen and other Americans, and he was not impressed with the older, we'll just say Creole population of New Orleans. One of his enemies included the Creole Bernard Marigny, who believed that Rapignac had purposely promoted the development of docks on the other side of Canal Street. I don't know. Louisiana also was not on Lafayette's original agenda. Yet on his arrival in New York, when word got down to New Orleans that he had arrived in New York, there was a 100-gun salute here. On August 24th, the mayor sent a letter to the general inviting him to New Orleans, and Lafayette confirmed this visit on a letter dated December 25th. What a Christmas present. The letter: the evidences of your esteem and goodwill are particularly dear to my heart. I long to thank you and to say what date I shall have the pleasure of offering you in person the expression of my gratitude. The continual movement of my visit to the United States, pleasant as it is, has deprived me, however, of opportunities to fulfill the duties of correspondence. However sacred they may be in my estimation. Only within a few days have I been able which will be able for me to satisfy an ardent desire to find myself in New Orleans. He goes on where he's going to travel, saying that he has to leave to be at the anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. The calculation of the time required for this long journey will determine the date of my departure from Washington. But you observe that at an early date in the spring, I will have the opportunity so much desired by me to see a country, my lifelong interest in which has been increased since its happy union to that admirable confederation, which is the glory as it will be the salvation of the human race. My friend, Mr. Everett Livingston, has charged himself with my letter. Lafayette. So he seems excited to come here. And now, though, the work had to begin. From the Courier, March 14th, mayor and city council work from the Pontalba while the city halls are repaired in anticipation of General Lafayette's visit to the city. So city council went to the Pontalba. Here's an image similar to what the building would have looked like when he arrived. The council hall became the salon, the armory became the dining room, and the offices of the mayor, secretary, and treasurer became apartments. The ceilings were embellished with cornices and rosework, marble mantelpieces replacing ugly wainscoting around the bottom, I think, and tapestries decorated the wall. The city's wealthiest citizens lent furniture, carpets, window hanging chandeliers, linens, china, and silver for the general. Word reached Governor Johnson that Lafayette would arrive at the city probably on April 2nd, at the same time, by the way. General order from the Courier: uniformed corps and companies in Louisiana militia ordered to hold themselves in readiness for the reception of General Lafayette on an occasion so interesting to Louisiana as the visit of this illustrious patriot. The commander-in-chief flatters himself that every effort will be made to render due honor to the, quote, guest of the nation, as he was often known. Louisiana, although a younger sister of the American family, sensibly appreciates the distinguished services he has rendered and views him as a venerable patriarch of liberty in both hemispheres. So Lafayette left Mobile, Alabama, to New Orleans on April the 8th of 1825 aboard the steamboat Natchez. His host city of New Orleans had sent the ship, and on board the ship included several delegates, the welcoming committee, organizing committee, headed by Armand Duplantier. And French-born Duplantier, probably be a better way of saying it, was the natural choice to head the delegation. The two men had been acquainted since the war, and they maintained a close relationship. An expert on Duplantier is currently working on a biography of the famous Louisianan. So I will limit my comments, but to say that Duplantier did serve as aide de camp to Lafayette during the war, yet their relationship appears to be beyond that of commander and subordinate or something like that. After the war, Lafayette maintained a, quote, lively sense of friendship, and that's according to Lafayette in a letter to James Madison. Congress appointed Armand as Lafayette's agent for the selection of lands in Louisiana to be deeded to Lafayette as compensation for his services. Moreover, Lafayette claimed that Armand, quote, is known in Louisiana to be the best connoisseur in the nature of lands and their improvement. His judgment will respect to the location will be in respect to the location will be of high importance. However, I don't know about how much of Lafayette's property and land acquisitions got to be discussed aboard the Natchez. A storm and very rough seas in the Gulf of Mexico forced everyone on board to lie down on the floor as to avoid seasickness. And they had nowhere else to lie, actually, since apparently high waves had inundated the cabins and soaked all of the beds. Nevertheless, they made their way to New Orleans on Sunday, April 10th. The weather was still terrible. And because of its proximity, coming upriver, the Natchez first stopped at the Chalmette battlefield, where Governor Henry Johnson, other officials, uniformed troops welcomed Lafayette. Crowd cheered for him, a large crowd. He gave a brief speech on the compatibility of, quote, a French population for a wise use of free institutions and for self-government. And his remarks suggest that perhaps he was aware of some sort of sectional strife existing between the old French population and the newly arrived Americans and their governmental institutions. Nevertheless, the group visited the plantation on the battlefield, Jackson's one-time headquarters, then owned by William Montgomery, and a carriage then brought Lafayette and his entourage to New Orleans. And this was a Sunday. And in other parts of the country, Sunday travel, Sunday appearances, Sunday celebrations could be maybe frowned upon. Yet in majority Catholic New Orleans, that was not a problem. A grand reception, of course, a band awaited the general. His official welcome happened in the Place des Armes, where a 68-foot arch was erected to commemorate the event. This picture is from the Picayune from, I believe, 1909, a rendering of it. The arch was made of wood and canvas, designed to like imitate Italian marble. This is kind of this ersatz structure, yet it was apparently quite impressive. They had these two statues of liberty and of justice, these Doric columns engraved apparently with the words Constitution was written on it. There's another, zoom in a little bit. These here, 24 stones in the archway. I think you maybe see my cursor there. These represent every state. The two figures with trumpets next to it. You can see it's the one has a banner that says Washington. One has a banner that says Lafayette, linking the two men, the two generals. And there was other things. On one side it was French, on one side it was English. Quote, a grateful republic dedicates this monument to Lafayette. Numerous other details like the names of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and various Civil War heroes. Mayor Rafignac greeted Lafayette under the arch. It was still raining. Each man addressed the crowd briefly. From there, he went to his temporary home at the city hall, the Cabildo, or as it was known then, Lafayette's house. From the balcony, the general reviewed some troops. After the riflemen were a file of 100 Choctaws marching in a single line. Lafayette is described as being pleased with the inclusion of Native Americans, given their role as allies to the Americans in the Seminole War, and Lafayette's contact with them, with the Oneida people during the Revolutionary War. And it was no secret that Lafayette did not approve of how the American government treated Native Americans. He didn't understand why all these treaties were never honored, treaties that George Washington had sent him off to go have signed. He just didn't get it. He didn't understand why the government treated people differently, given that there was this American document claiming that all men are created equal. Nevertheless, a large dinner was prepared that evening for many invited guests, and he attended a performance at the Orleans Theater in his honor. L'École de Vieillards, like the School for Old Men, I believe. It's a comedy. On Monday, April 11th, I'm sorry, the weather continued to be disagreeable, according to the Courier. Yesterday, the friend of Washington, the friend of liberty, the nation's guest made his entry in New Orleans. The extreme inclemency of the weather, the rain, which fell by torrents. This did not stop him, though, from receiving visitors. Quote, we are informed that General Lafayette will receive every day the visits of ladies and gentlemen from the hour of 11 until 2 in the evening. However, the ball honoring Lafayette is postponed until the 12th. But going back a little bit, the fact that Lafayette opened up his doors to everybody from 11 to 2 is perhaps representative of his commitment to equality. You know, obviously he mingled very well with aristocrats, with city leaders across the nation. But he still saw it important to visit with ordinary people. So the elites and the government may have paid for him to be there, but he still saw it as important to visit with ordinary people. That's quite telling of him, you know. He did, of course, receive many politicians on that day, including former governors, Andre Bienvenu Roman, Pierre d'Aubergny, probably other people with streets named after them around the city. He addressed the Bar Association that day, which I will read an excerpt from here. He said, among the benefits resulting from this revolution, of which you, sir, have spoken so well, and among all the particular reasons for congratulating the citizens of Louisiana on their union with the American family of states, I like to observe that this state, a long-time subject to the barbarity of the ancient criminal jurisprudence of France and that of Spain, not less barbarous, and established under the auspices of the assassin of the generous Villery and his worthy companions, that this state is about to obtain the distinct honor of perfecting and modernizing the criminal codes of the United States, already so superior to all others. So not only does Lafayette believed that the United States criminal codes are the best in the world, he believes that Louisiana's have the potential to be the most progressive in the country, it seems. After addressing the Bar Association, he later went to Caldwell's Theater, probably the Camp Street Theater. I'm kind of going back and forth on that one. We'll get back to that in a minute, to see The Prisoner of Olmutz, a play about Lafayette's imprisonment. On Tuesday, the 12th, Lafayette attended a banquet, reviewed another military review. Additionally, he received a group of Spanish expatriates who expressed gratitude for his opposition to the invasion of Spain, the end of the liberal constitution. This day is also said to be the opening day of Faubourg Lafayette, which I'm still, again, not 100% sure on that one. Wednesday, Lafayette visited with the famed Père Antoine, whom we had a long conversation with, and he, quote, affectionately embraced. The rain finally stopped, and that evening, the entire city, French Quarter now, was illuminated with lamps. Lights on all of the buildings and all of the windows, and Lafayette paraded through the streets in a carriage waving to everybody. Again, back to the theater, off to the Orleans Theater, which would be where the Omni Royal is today, behind the cathedral. And then to the St. Philip's Theater, owned by James Caldwell, who was an Englishman. And this is where I'm getting some conflicting information from different sources. One source is calling it Caldwell's Theater. Another is calling it the St. Philip's Theater. The St. Philip's Theater is where the McDonough School in the French Quarter would be, but they did cater to English-speaking people. Later, Caldwell also owned the Camp Street Theater on the other side of Canal Street. So there's a little bit of confusion here, but this is a diplomatic move, and it's a smart one. He's going to both the French and the English-speaking theaters, being seen, attending plays. He's a politician here. On Thursday, Lafayette met with a delegation of free men of color, including veterans of the Battle of New Orleans. And while our collective historical narrative, I like that, remembers Lafayette, this figurehead of the American French revolutions and a promoter of liberty, he really belonged to a minority among white revolutionaries in the Atlantic world. He believed that regardless of race, every man was entitled to freedom, entitled to the freedom he had defended during American French revolutions, War of 1812. From the Courier, titled, actually, I don't have the title here. Never mind. But the men of color had solicited the favor to present themselves to the general, and at the hour he had appointed to receive them, they had proceeded by their commander, John Mercier, who addressed the general as follows. The command of the Corps of Men of Color, who so eminently contributed to the defense of this country, has been entrusted to me and its officers, scattered until now, and before reorganizing themselves, felt that they should first offer to one of the heroes of the American independence their tribute of respect and admiration. The brave men that I command, in whatever situation they may have been placed, would have purchased at the price of their blood the honor of being presented to you. They felt an ardent desire to tell you that they had arms always ready to defend their country and hearts devoted to you. Dear General, can't read that one, to accept his sincere tribute of respect and admiration. The general received the men of color with demonstrations of esteem and affection and said to them, quote, gentlemen, I have often during the War of Independence seen African blood shed with honor in our ranks for the cause of the United States. I have learnt with the liveliest interest how you answered to the appeal of General Jackson. What a glorious use you made of your arms for defense of Louisiana. I cherish the sentiments of gratitude for your services and of admiration for your valor. Accept those also of my personal friendship and of the pleasure I shall have always experience in meeting you with you again. The general then kindly shook hands with them all and thanked the governor for the opportunity he had given him to become acquainted with them. Quite telling. Later that day, Lafayette attended a ceremony in his honor put on by the Grand Lodge of the State, Masons. From the Courier, last one I think I will read to you today. He addressed the crowd. Among the multiple testimonies of esteem and affection which I have received since my arrival in the United States, few have produced in my mind emotions as pleasing as those which I now experience. When I fought for the cause of independence, Louisiana was a province of the European monarchies, and the idea that it would at a future period become admitted to the American Confederation, however pleasing to my imagination, did not appear likely to be realized. But it has pleased heaven to prolong my life long enough to behold a country inhabited by a population composed in a great measure of the descendants of my compatriots, enjoying all the blessings of a free government and showing themselves worthy of the felicity they enjoy. Already has freedom spread its happy influence over every institution, and we now behold as one of its effects the Masonic Confederation assimilating itself by its union to that. I'm sorry, it kind of fades out here. Nevertheless, heaven allowed him to live long enough to see Louisiana, a place where so many of his compatriots now live, become part of the United States. That evening, of course, to the Orleans Theater. This time he went to see a play, quote, Lafayette in New Orleans, a vaudeville written by a Creole. I would love to see that play. Friday the 15th was his last day in New Orleans. His boat stopped in Baton Rouge for a reception and banquet, but only stayed a few hours in Baton Rouge. Lafayette had promised to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Bunker Hill, like I said, before he returned to France on September 10th, 1825. When he left New Orleans, though, he said his goodbyes to officials, and he walked with his group to the levee. Apparently, the streets, the balconies, and the levees were crowded with as much as 10,000 people who were cheering for him and trying to get that final glimpse of this hero. Once the ship took off, though, it is said that the crowd became quiet and everyone stood there watching until the ship was out of sight going upriver. However, just as the unity in New Orleans that was created after the Battle of New Orleans was short-lived, so too was the unity created by Lafayette's visit. It did not stick. By the late 1830s, Americans dominated New Orleans' commercial and economic worlds, and they were on the verge of breaking exclusive Creole control of state politics. The numbers were going in their direction. In 1836, state legislation divided the city into 3 municipalities. I'm sure all of you know, 2 Catholic and Francophone and 1 primarily American. This experiment in semi-autonomous governance lasted from 36 until 52. Each municipality had its council, its own seal, police force, tax codes, currency, they said libraries, things like that. Although ethnic difficulties plagued the old citizens and the new arrivals, the division of the city only strained relations, caused confusion, and did not help the city economically. This separation also saw a growing Irish and German population aligning with the Anglo interests. English-speaking Americans dominated New Orleans politics when the city did reunify. And a little bit out of the purview, though, I would say that it was the founding of the Mystic Crew of Comus in 57, although initially scoffed at, of course, by white Creole elites. But it served as a unifying force for white New Orleanians. And during Reconstruction, divisions became even more pronounced. But through Mardi Gras, the incorporation of these ancient medieval themes into the procession not only created this mythos surrounding the cruise, but it highlighted a wider movement of Anglo New Orleanians embracing Catholic imagery and themes to further unite the white population of New Orleans under this shared identity. In the mid-19th century, this changing bourgeoisie mindset saw a lot of people across the country becoming disillusioned with Victorian Protestantism and embracing kind of a static medieval piety. But long-standing cultural divisions between the white Creole and Anglo populations really eroded in the face of a government led by Republicans and Black people. These were not the lessons that Lafayette wished to instill in the United States. Not at all. However, though, I do believe that there was one lesson from Lafayette that Lafayette taught New Orleans, or his visit taught New Orleans, and that was how to host an event and a dignitary. A few very famous visitors coming in on the heel of Lafayette's visit received excellent receptions. They were treated very well. Andrew Jackson in 1840, despite his very delicate health, this 74-year-old, I think at the time, former president, returned to New Orleans on the 25th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans. He actually set for this portrait to be painted in the St. Charles Hotel. Famously, Jenny Lind in 1851. According to this one article, accommodations for the expected increase in visitors to the city were being made, with every vacant tenement being brought into use. So that's basically Airbnb. It was said that there would be, quote, room enough for all to spare for all comers. And people were converging on New Orleans to see Jenny Lind. One resident declared that the whole city was going to have a gay, fashionable, and exciting time of it. And just as city workers, officials worked to beautify the city for Lafayette's visit, officials made sure the town impressed Jenny Lind when she stepped off her steamboat. Thousands of residents were also there cheering her arrival. The Daily Crescent described it as a very lively and animated scene. Famously, her hostess, the Baroness Pontalba, of course, made sure she had everything she needed. And she performed at the St. Charles Theater. Originally only going to perform 12, but had to add an additional performance. And then famously, the Baroness auctioned off all of the furniture where Lind had departed. Russian Grand Duke Alexis Romanov, seeing the Rex parade. He was also accompanied by, I believe it was Buffalo Bill, because he'd been out on a hunt, and General Custer. Other dignitaries who received the red carpet in New Orleans, all of them modeled after Lafayette's visit. Alice Roosevelt, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, obviously going to the Comus and Rex balls in like 1950, Charles de Gaulle in 1960, Pope John Paul II in 1987. And I believe it is very fair to say that this continues, this gracious, this unparalleled ability to host an event continues today. As Jason mentioned, we will have the Super Bowl here in just a couple of months. And then, of course, most famously, New Orleans did roll out the red carpet very recently for another esteemed guest. So thank you all for being here, for listening. dwood@tulane.edu. If you have any questions or want to email me, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Derek, are you saying there's a correlation between Lafayette's visit and Shaquille O'Neal being named Bacchus?
Oh, I didn't think about that one. I missed that. That is clearly a gap in my research, but I will work on that.
But I do think that's an interesting way of looking at it, is the this hospitality aspect to the city and people coming here. It's a fun way of looking at it overall, and there's got to be a shred of truth in that overall.
I would say
I
so,
think,
and I
I really like that.
emphasize something positive in a way, because I do believe that the lessons that Lafayette was trying to express of like this amazing legal system that Louisiana was going to have, that all of the, his ideals of liberty and equality never manifested we'll just focus in this state here, as sectional strife continued, as the Civil War continued, which led to Reconstruction and brutal guerrilla warfare in the countryside and in the city, up through Jim Crow laws.
Yeah.
So I think, though, the lesson that was actually learned from Lafayette's visit was how to host people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, the letter, it seems very heartfelt, and as a Frenchman and as a somewhat of as an American, but we spoke last about have he been offered to be the governor, and it's from some way it kind of makes me say, like, maybe he regrets a little bit that he didn't take that governorship where he could create all these Frenchmen who became Americans.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I I don't know how. I guess I don't know how serious that offer was. I'm sure if he wanted the job, it could have been his.
I believe earlier, it might have been two lectures ago, they said that it was offered to him by Jefferson.
Yes, yeah, I've read that. Okay.
So, all right, great.
I do see this great memento though in the chat.
Oh wait, hold on a second. Yeah. Let's see,
It
we
looks
have
like a little bottle. Maybe it had perfume or whiskey.
it was a Lafayette flask.
Ah, cognac. That would be more appropriate.
And, Charles says, I think the Swifty Lafitte tour of New Orleans.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, everybody, we have one more lecture to go. I'm going to put everybody in the waiting room, and then we're going to get real quickly. We're going to get started, and we're going to get you out here a little bit early. So, Derek, I want to thank you
Oh,
so much for doing that today. Great lecture, really, really great work, and we really do appreciate it.
oh my goodness. Thank you. And again, thank you all. And again, dwood at tulane.edu if you need to follow up, questions, comments, conundrums, all those.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Of course.
Randy, are you there?